You're doing this to yourself, Jake. Too tight, Jake. You gotta get out. You're gonna die in a tiny space, Jake. Too tight, Jake.
After you!
You gotta get out. No. Oh, what's moving in, Jake? Stuck. What's moving in, Jake? It's tight, Jake. I'm scared.
Gotta get out.
I can hear you. I can hear you. What? I can hear you. I'm onto you.
Who takes care of the good times, Jake?
We're a team.
We're best pals, Jake.
You want to get rid of me?
You know life without me?
You don't know life without me.
Do you know life without me? No, because it doesn't
Exist. Do they talk about me, Jake?
No, because I don't exist. Tell all your friends
I protect
about me
you, I
then,
protect
Jake.
I protect you, and I control you. If I say do, you obey. If I say you're scared...
You're scared!
Been listening to the other side, haven't you, Jake? Listening to people that want to hurt you, Jake.
New people.
No!
Not old friends like me.
People you shouldn't trust. Not me. I've been your friend forever, since the beginning.
Get rid of them, Jake.
Forever.
They're the enemy.
Not me.
They're new. I'm old. I say they go. I say you do.
You're weak without me. Weak. It's us against them, Jake. It's us against them. I'm coming to get you.
You want to get rid of me, Jake? You want to make an enemy out of me? You want to get rid of me, do ya? Do ya? You want to get rid of me? Me. Boom. Ha. Still here, Jake. How long have I looked after you?
You can't win this one without me. Oh, no. You know why? I am you. You ain't me.
The greatest con that he ever pulled was making you believe that he is you.
You ain't me.
I am you!
You're not me.
Come on! Your best fucking friend! I am you!
You don't control me. I control you. You come to my house with a loaded gun? You speak to me like I'm a fucking idiot? What's your game? What's your game? Speak to me. Speak to me, or I'll kill you like the fucking dog that you are. Fear me. Fear me. Fear me. Fear me. Fear me.
The ego is the worst confidence trickster we could ever figure, we could ever imagine, because you don't see it.
And the single biggest con is, I am you.
The problem is that the ego hides in the last place that you'd ever look, within itself.
It disguises its thoughts as your thoughts, its feelings as your feelings. You think it's you.
People's need to protect their own egos knows no bounds. They will lie, cheat, steal, kill, do whatever it takes to maintain what we call ego boundaries.
People have no clue that they're in prison. They don't know that there is an ego. They don't know the distinction.
At first it's difficult for the mind to accept that there's something beyond itself, that there's something of greater value and greater capacity for discerning truth than itself.
In religion, the ego manifests as the devil. And of course, no one realizes how smart the ego is because it created the devil so you could blame someone else.
In creating this imaginary external enemy, we usually made a real enemy for ourselves, and that becomes a real danger to the ego, but that's also the ego's creation.
There is no such thing as an external enemy, no matter what that voice in your head is telling you. All perception of an enemy is a projection of the ego as the enemy.
In that sense, you could say that 100% of our external enemies are of our own creation.
Your greatest enemy is your own inner perception, is your own ignorance, is your own ego.
The ego is a mind-made sense of self, a me based on mind activity. So now the ego has a certain structure to it. It needs certain things to survive. It needs to emphasize the otherness, as I call it, of others. So it needs to judge people. It needs to immediately conceptualize and define a person that you meet. Immediately you will find judgments arising and comparison arriving. How the image of who I am, how does that compare to this person? Inferiority, superiority. The ego needs enemies, because by creating an enemy outside, somebody who is against me, I emphasize that sense of self, the mind-made sense of self. So there is a basic dysfunction built into the structure of the ego. And so that works both on a personal level and on a collective level, because there's the collective ego of tribes and nations, or whatever the collective derives its identity from. It could be a religion too. And so you have the struggle between tribes, nations, religions against the others, the non-believers or the evil others. Continuously you have that playing itself out in history. There's always the other tribe, the other nation, the other religion, or even the other sect within the same religion is the enemy. So there's this built-in tendency to make others into enemy. Why is that? Because the ego needs to emphasize the otherness. By creating enemies outside, you have a stronger sense of who you are, but it's a false sense of who you are. An example of that in Nazi Germany, for example, they ended up making the whole world into an enemy. There were enemies in the East, enemies in the West, everywhere. And of course, at that time, people had a very strong sense of national identity. Very few people committed suicide at that time because they were so immersed in this false sense of self that gave them a temporary feeling of, now we know who we are, because we are. So the boundary between self and other becomes very rigid. And similar things, some religions, they emphasize the evil non-believers. And once you have conceptualized another tribe or another group, you can no longer feel their humanity and their aliveness, because you have transformed them into a mental concept. You attach a label to them. Once you've done that, violence becomes possible, and you don't feel anymore what you're doing to another human being, because you have already dehumanized the other human being by transforming them into a mental concept. But before you did that, you had already done it to yourself without knowing it, because you had identified with certain mental concepts and said, that's me. That's the collective one, that is us. That is our identity. That is who we are. These are our beliefs. That's our history, whatever it is. So false, you already derive your sense of self only from concepts, and then you impose the same thing on others. And then there's the structural need then to make that even stronger. So the enemies arise. So humans, if you read a history book, you'll see continuous, completely senseless and pointless warfare between nations. The worst of it was the 20th century. And so when you see that, then there's no doubt that there is a very strong element of dysfunction in the human mind. And really, this is what we are addressing when we become more conscious of compulsive thinking, and we become conscious that we have been deriving our sense of self from what we've been telling ourselves in our minds of who we are, in other words, from thinking. Then suddenly we see this operating in ourselves. We see this unconscious process operating in ourselves, and by seeing it, another dimension has arisen. I call it awareness or presence.
When you release the ego and you let go of it, you suddenly learn what it's like to love unconditionally. Because it's only the ego that stops you loving unconditionally.
Mm.
And that's it. All there is, in the world is unconditional love. It's about, it's not for me to judge. It's not for me to opinionate, really. It's not for me to do any of that.
Mm.
I basically said simply, if I don't want to be controlled, then I should want for no form of control.
Mm.
And that's absolutely true. It is absolutely true. All I know is that I've got to love everything. And sometimes the hardest things to love are the ones that need it the most.
Mm.
I sat in a conversation with some people a little while ago, and someone said they were saying the best way to sort this out is to go down to Parliament, drag a couple out and hang them. I said, oh, right, yeah, that's a brilliant way of sorting it out.
Yeah,
and I said, Gandhi actually said an eye for an eye would leave the world completely blind, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
Gandhi, a lot of great bits of wisdom that came from Gandhi, which the brain doesn't understand, but the heart does. I said, but if Tony Blair walked through the door at this moment in time, and you pointed a gun at him, I would stand in the way. And he couldn't understand that. And I said, well, the reason being is because Tony Blair is a victim. He's more a victim than you are.
Yeah, there you go.
And he needs my help to get back to being the human being and getting out of the person, because his life is the ego. And the only reason he can do what he can do is because he lives in the ego, and the ego has dropped a shutter door down behind the eyes and cut him off from his emotions. So, but sooner or later, because of what's actually happening in the world, them shutter doors are going to be lifted, and poor old Tony Blair and George Bush and all these people in the world who live in the person have done these nasty things are suddenly going to have to live with the realization of what they've done.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that they need to do in order to remedy.
Absolutely.
You know.
That's because it's what you give out, you're going to get back.
Yeah.
And they're going to get it back. The only thing is that the powers that be, that whoever it is who've done whatever they've done, and I don't put any name to them, but whoever it is, they worked out something very simple. All you have to do is play on the ego. And all you have to do is build a world that revolves around greed. But like I said with the fire, greed is like a fire. Greed can never end. Because if you build something and you've always been greedy, you can't just switch that off.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, enough is never enough. and they will consume everything, and within that process, consume themselves.
And I'm thinking if that actually is more of a law of nature in a way, actually, meaning that it's like a parasite in that sense, that you know, that turns on itself, or when it finally have killed the host, if you will, dies itself. It's like it's
a virus.
Yeah, it's like eradicating itself. It's like the last thing that it can do.
Mankind's like a virus on the earth, and there's only two ways of getting rid of a virus. Either you give it an antidote or you eradicate it. That's the only two ways. Now, we've been given a choice, and we've been given a choice thousands of times to cure the virus. And the simple virus that afflicts mankind is the ego. That's the only thing it is. It's nothing. That's what I see. I only see, because that's what I know happens in me. I've watched myself. I've watched what my ego, not only what it's done to other people, but what it's done to me. I've watched what it can do, and it is the most self-destructive element that anything could possibly possess. It's a self-destruct button. It really is. It can destroy itself. If it can't destroy everything around it, it will destroy itself or its host. And you're absolutely right. It's a parasite. It is a parasite. Like I said, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know anything about it. And the point is, I don't want to know, because it's not important. None of that information's important. All I know is that I'm suddenly having an ability to actually deny it control, and actually say to it, no, you're not controlling me anymore. I'm not controlling you. I'm just going to cut it off. And it's very, I don't know, it's probably a paradox, is that if something's saying it's got power over you and you turn your back on it and ignore it, all of a sudden its power diminishes.
Yeah, well, that's true.
And if I create a world today that I love and I respect, and I believe myself to have no greater dignity than anybody else, I'm no better, no less, then the world that I'm creating, my world, will be that world. Now, if I create a world of hate and I create a world of war and destruction, then that's what the future will hold for me. And I believe that I am constructing the future, because it's not here yet, it's not written. It's something that we have a chance. That's why Gandhi said so simply, we have to be the change we want to see. Because when we change now, then we affect how we are in the future. Because everything that we're around us is affected by the way that we present ourselves. Everything is affected. And the ideal, look how people talk to each other. If you talk to people with attitude and anger, then generally you're going to get attitude and anger back.
Yeah.
Now, if you talk to people generally politely and respectfully, and you don't use harmful words or anything towards, then they react in the same way.
In most cases, that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. But sooner or later, it doesn't matter who you come up against. I've noticed this, that it doesn't matter how people present themselves to you. Sooner or later, the people do start to, you connect to the human being. You start to bypass the ego and you start to talk to the heart. And when you finally get through to the heart, the human being suddenly realizes that you have an ability to switch this thing off. You can switch it off. You can actually say, no, you're not controlling me anymore. And the world that we live in controls us through our ego. It controls us through our fear. It controls us through the need for money, and money resides in the ego. Everything is to do with the person and the ego. There's nothing in this world that doesn't revolve around these two elements, which really are the same. They're just separated, and that's why the system that they use with the person, the piece of paper, works so well, because it's deception. And the ego deceives you. That's exactly what it's doing, because it's saying, look at what we say we have a personality. So we're actually now accrediting actual human feelings to something that is non-existent. we're actually doing it. We're saying we have a personality. But it's nothing to do with the mind. It's to do with the human being. But they've now saying to us, well, I was told when I was a kid I had a personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Now I look back and I'm saying, well, yeah, I did have a personality disorder because I was always fighting against the person. I was always fighting against this so-called personality that I had. I was always at war with it.
Mm.
And that's what caused me so much distress all through my life. But what it was actually teaching me was that there is this thing there. And that I do, I can have the ability to just say, no, you're not going to control me anymore. I'm not going to do the things you want me to do. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to say, I want to love. I don't care what you say anymore. I want to love. But this person's shouting in your face. It doesn't matter. I want to love this human being. I'm not dealing with the person anymore. I'm dealing with a human being. And a human being requires love. Doesn't matter what the person is or what the person's done. The human being needs my love. And sooner or later, the human being will realise that there is a person there, and they'll have the ability to disconnect from that person and become a human being again.
Mm.
And that's how I look at it. I just look at it very simply. And the more, and like I said, I look at the laws of attraction, and the laws of attraction say that things. It says to me that if I love, I will be loved.
Yeah.
And if I do not want for control of anything, then I won't be controlled. And I can self-govern. I don't need a government. I don't need someone to tell me what to do. I don't need to be given liberty. I was born a man, and a man is born free.
Yes.
I don't need to be given liberty. I don't need to be given something called freedom. I will never accept that one element of a community can say, we have everything, it is ours, and we are going to make you pay for the pleasure of living on planet Earth.
Mm.
I won't accept that. I'm sorry. I can never accept it because it's wrong.
And again, this idea of that you can also create the environment that you want to be in. I like that idea a lot as well, meaning that on one regard, even though that the planet is slowly being turned into this grid of control, some people call it prison planet, whatever you want to call it. It's slowly but surely getting tighter and tighter, the grip, as it were, around this idea of our freedom. But at the same time, I also feel that we can live free in the system that we're in, if you know what I mean. Just with this
you can.
idea of law of attraction that you were mentioning, John, that what we focus on, if we focus too much on how bad our situation is all the time, then
it gets worse.
Yeah, well, exactly, doesn't it? Isn't that interesting?
It does, absolutely. It gets worse. That's why, I love the way you've put that. It's absolutely true, because it is the laws of attraction. If you focus on the bad, then the bad is just going to keep. See, the point is, I suppose, the simpleness of this is that whatever's happening in the world is happening because it's meant to happen.
Yeah.
Everyone who leaves today is meant to leave, and everybody who comes today is meant to come. That's how I see things. I see things quite